Well, good morning, Bruce. Welcome to the show. It's really an honor to have you on. How are you, man?
Awesome, awesome. Great. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, look, let's jump right in. I want to start by saying the following. I think customer experience, and particularly the service part of customer experience, is in as bad of a shape as I have seen it in my over 20 years in this space. It's not all uniformly bad or uniformly good. There's obviously peaks and valleys amongst brands, etc. But I think maybe let's go back to your background as an engineer. You really have looked into the mechanics of this. What does your background reveal most about CX that most CX leaders miss?
Yeah, so referring to my background, people always wonder how I went from early in my career designing missile systems for submarines to
Right.
later in my career focusing on human experience and bettering humanity. And so the answer is there's no through line, but your question's a great one because I do think like an engineer, and I've always thought like an engineer, and as an engineer, I always think that the you put together things and then they work in a certain way. And
Mm,
that's always the view that I had on customer experience was that customer experience was an output, right? And as an engineer, I knew you had to tinker organizations and dynamics and things to get that output of the experience you wanted. And I think that is remains a troubling part of customer experience because I think a lot of people miss the fact that you have to put pieces together to get an output and they focus on the output, right? Or they have some measurement system, where we're going to focus on a satisfaction measurement or a net promoter score measurement. That's the output, right? The stuff you need to tinker with as an engineer are the parts and pieces of the organization, and they sometimes fumble or ignore that entire component of it.
exactly. There's this sort of dashboard watching, right? You just focus on the speedometer and not the entire car. I want to go a little bit back. I'm old enough to remember when customer experience and CX wasn't the big thing in an organization. And then it became, which was really in the early days to me a positive. But I feel like we've lost our way there. What problem was CX as a discipline trying to solve in the beginning?
So it's interesting. I'll take you back a little bit, which is in the people talked about customer experience forever, right? Customers were important, but the discipline of it really started, I would say, around 2000. And it followed up after the miscue of the CRM
Mm,
wave. So there was a wave of investment in technology and like Siebel and players like that who were going to change the world because they had technology applied to customer relationships, CRM, customer relationship management, right? Those didn't quite pan out. And I wrote an article in 2002 said, forget about customer experience, CRM, focus on customer experience. Because at that point, I noticed that they were trying to do something without focusing actually on the people who were they wanted to impact. And I think that it evolved there as an outcome of people trying to layer on to CRM, and that's how it sort of started to build momentum. But it really kicked in 2008. So in 2008, I was at Forrester Research. And for the listeners, if you're too young to remember or it's too painful to remember if you're older, 2008 was horrible time, right?
that's right.
The
That's right.
economy was
Financial
slammed.
crisis. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, what wasn't pretty, wasn't pretty. But you know what was pretty?
Mm,
My business inside of Forrester, I had just started looking and defining enterprise-wide customer experience, and my business was booming. And I would
mm,
say that's the point when where CX really got momentum, and it was at that point around how do we build organic growth? So you ask what's the problem? It was trying to solve lots of things, but I would say it got its first big kick in the butt to grow when there was a requirement in 2008 for organizations to figure out how do we how do we retain the customers we have, and how do we build organic growth into our systems, because the entire environment and the economic collapse made, other types of growth impossible.
I remember then I was running service for Coca-Cola at the time. And, I've been consuming Bruce's stuff for a long time for those of you listening out. So this is I'm nerding out a little bit. And I saw the shift, right? I also saw some things in the marketplace that was puzzling. Lots of people who ran service, so I ran service and supply chain and those kinds of things, started rebranding themselves as CX. Like there was a CX then became this ubiquitous thing, in part because your CEO listened to you. It was kind of this thing where if you slap the label on it, then you got some attention. So let me ask you again. You've talked a little bit about this. What did that movement get right? And what did we get wrong, or I would say just misdiagnose as CX began to kind of grow up?
Well, I think what it absolutely got right is the fact that the ultimate success of an organization has to do with how customers view their interactions and experiences, right? I often say that experience is the IO, the input output device of human beings, right?
Mm,
That's the only way we interact. So recognizing that your organization doesn't succeed without customers wanting to do business, continuing to do business, and the only connection you really have with them are the experiences that you create for them ultimately. Got that right. And it started on the right foot, because it turns out, and this is true for just about every CX effort, right? When you start a CX effort, you can uncover insights about your customers that end up being relatively easy to fix,
mm.
or to begin with. So you get this movement right away. Oh, I didn't know those customers were thinking that way, and I didn't know these customers were thinking. So get some low hanging fruit, and I think that's what generated the early momentum, right? You got that, but as you dig into them, a lot of the things that you want to make, a lot of improvements you want to make, require structural change, and organizations weren't committed to the structural change that it ultimately required.
I think I think that part hits home so much for me. I'll tell the story from someone who was an operator at the time, and all of a sudden there was a CX department, right? And I was told, I mean, frankly, their mission was improve NPS and these metrics, but the qualitative part of the messaging was we were going to improve the customer experience and customers are going to love us and all of those kinds of things. So I guess I will ask you this question. In your views, scanning this then for as an analyst and someone as an observer at that time, did organizations give CX the power it needed to, to just to not to really impact the change they were promising? And I'm speaking to you as a guy who I just had this counterpart, right? I was VP on the ops side, and here's this person who is telling me, and I'm loving every minute of it. And I I I never got the promise on the other end. You who watched it more horizontally, how would you rate how companies decided to empower these CX functions that they invested in?
Well, I think they tried to empower them, but had the wrong intent from the
Mm,
beginning.
okay.
Um, so a lot of early on, there were when the CX got branded as a department, and it was sort of in vogue to have a CX leader. There was a view that somehow that person, you even said it in the start of that question, we want customers to love us, right? First of all, that is that to me starts us on the wrong foot,
Mm.
in two ways. One is that the role of the CX organization should have always been the role of a change agent, not of an experience owner, right? Because remember, you go back to what I say, it's you have a system you're changing. You can't layer on. So, but these CX leaders were seen as people that sort of would ultimately land good experience with customers, as opposed to people that would embed good practices across the organizations that would ultimately land. So that was one mistake. The other mistake was that love statement you said, right?
Mm,
Well, we got to get
mm.
customers to love us. In my mind, customer experience was never about that. And some of the problems is came with the experience economy work, right? The experience economy work got people believe that CX was this layering of experiential things on top of whatever your core business is, right? Forget your core business. You layer on some experiential things like Starbucks had, Wi-Fi and seating, even though there were like the stories like that, right? And suddenly customers would love you. And I pushed really hard on that because my view of customer experience was always it's really about how do we better understand and serve customers. Love is never the goal, right? It
Mm.
might be in some areas for some customers at some times, but sometimes it's just let's just make customers get through this process that they're going to hate anyway as quickly and with as little problem as possible. That's certainly an appropriate goal for some type of interactions. So the combination of thinking that that customer experience leader is going to be responsible for the experience and that that experience will layering on is going to make our customers love us really put those CX departments and leaders in, I think, in a untenable position from the beginning.
I I love that framing of it, in that I mean, I literally remember, I was COO at the time, introducing this person as the person who's gonna bring us to the promised land and change the way customers feel about us. I wanna move on to another topic, but before I go, I can't leave this conversation without talking about NPS. I I have strong feelings about NPS, and they've evolved over time. So I'll just ask you, did NPS ultimately help us in the area of customer experience?
So this is the NPS is the most heated area of debate in anywhere. Anytime I published over the years, I would like every year I would publish my 9 thoughts on NPS. It was the same 9 thoughts every year for a decade, right? But they were new and fresh to everyone, and they always like got a lot of following because people you hate or love NPS. So I'm going to say this definitively: NPS was great for customer experience. Stop, period, end all. Now, everyone in the audience can argue whether NPS is a good mechanism, whether people should be using it now. Those are separate things. The question about whether NPS was good for customer experience, there should be no debate. It propelled the focus on it. You know, it to me, you, the real question about whether NPS was good has to come from did it focus the energy and investment in customer experience, and nothing did more, I think, than necessarily NPS. Yes, NPS was really good for CX. Is NPS a good measurement? Absolutely not. Is NPS a good structure? Became even worse when you ended up looking across platforms, right? In a survey, email survey, picking a question from 0 to 10 on a scale is tenuous to begin with. But
Right.
you move that to a phone, with a little screen, or better work better, how about you have a call center person ask that
That's
question,
right,
right?
live, right,
Um,
right.
and so it's the structure of 0 to who does a 0 to 10 thing anyway? But, and you come back to and then we create this false precision, right? What we wanna know whether customers
Tractors,
are detractors,
promoters,
promoters, or passive, right? So what we do is we say, "Pick a number," and then we are arbitrarily gonna decide based on the number you give us which one of those 3 you're in. Drove me crazy because I always thought, well, Why don't you ask them directly in some way? If you're a promoter, you'll say you're a promoter. If you're passive,
Right.
you'll say you're passive. If you're a detractor, say you're a detractor. Much more direct ways. And we only need to give them three options.
That's right. That's right.
And then make it even worse. I did this study, it was the first of its kind, where I looked at how people answer the net promoter question across the world. And the problems we're talking about now are 10 times as much when you look across the world. In Japan, no one would give anyone higher than a 6. A 6 is a promoter, right? But we're still interpreting that data, right? Because 6 is on our scale, that's a detractor. Never mind that culturally, no one would give a 7 to 10 on a scale. So anyway, you know, let's separate the question. Is NPS a good measure? Should it be used? Should it continue to be used? That's different than the question about, was NPS good for customer experience?
Couldn't agree with you more. I'm going to share this clip to anyone who asks me my take on this because you've just put it into better words. I I I, I can separate both things in my mind. My CEO, when I was in industry, never cared 2 cents about the customer experience until NPS somehow entered the zeitgeist, and all of a sudden, someone who didn't care was talking to me about the experience and we're talking about investment. So that was a net good that may not have happened because of NPS. And we can spend an entire show talking about the mechanism and some of the ridiculousness of the actual and then the worshiping of the score and on that happened thereafter. I want to talk moving forward in a more constructive way about experience management and this evolution into experience management. Assume my audience knows nothing about this. What is this going from CX to XM? Why did we need to do it, and what is it in general?
Okay, so I'm going to give your audience a little bit of inside baseball, which is or that I've never spoken with anyone, because no one's ever sort of asked me that question. But it's a good question, and it's because there was never a need for experience management. So I'll give you a history of that. Experience management, the term XM experience management, was created because Qualtrics was wanted to become the dominant platform vendor, and there were already CX players, so they wanted to label themselves something different. So they created XM as experience management. Now, I continued with that. So my company was acquired by Qualtrics, um, because I saw that they were dominating the messages. And from my perspective, everything they were saying about XM was inside of what I was talking about in terms of customer experience management,
Got it.
right? To me,
Got it.
employee experience was part of it. Experience management. You remember, I'm an engineer, right?
Yeah.
Part of customer experience. You can't get the customer experience you want if experience management isn't. So the model that I had for Temkin Group included brand, product, employee, all the stuff that Qualtrics was labeling as XM. So when we were acquired, we just shifted what amounted to be our same sort of story. And for me, the reason we did it is the goal was to teach companies, right? And Qualtrics gave us a much bigger platform and the ability to teach companies exactly how we wanted to and exactly how we had been teaching it, with just some more terminology. And one good thing did come, many good things, but what I would say one of the positives came from it was the ability to look under the covers at what the mechanisms were that were creating great experiences, right? Like behavioral science and design. And those are things that were inside of customer experience that became a little bit more visible when we said, okay, these things can be applied in other areas. But at the end of the day, the world didn't need XM, and it grew. And to be honest with you, as most disruptive terminology and approaches come from the need of a tech vendor to differentiate itself.
Got it. I want to talk about humanity at scale. I've seen your language and your focus change over time. more recently. And and tell me about that because at first glance it seemed, is he out of the business? Is he out saving the world now and digging wells in Africa or something? So tell me, when you write and talk about humanity at scale, what do you mean there?
Yeah, that's great. For those who don't know, that's my move. That's a movement focused on now, which is to try to inspire and empower leaders to create more human-centric organizations. So it's when I was, I was at Qualtrics for 5 years after having my own company for 8 and Forrester for 12, and I'd worked on a lot of the same things. And one of the what I realized, and I'd realized this a while ago, it was nagging at me, was two things. One is I felt like the the improvements that I wanted to see organizations make and I want to see in the world were not going to be driven by the people who were customer experience, employee experience, or experience management professionals, right? Whatever they did was ultimately limited by the perceptions and attitudes and beliefs of leaders, of a broad set of leaders. So that was one thing. I knew then that, like, leaders were really the key. And the second thing is I felt like I could make an even bigger impact on the world if I stepped out of just doing the thing I was doing over and over again and really looked at a new way in which I could, like, change the world. So, humanity at scale, what I'm trying to do is create a whole new way of thinking about leaders. So you'll see in my work a lot of the stuff so I have a weekly newsletter, I have a podcast, right? And for customer experience management professionals, they'll hear things that will resonate with them, right? Because a lot of it is overlapping in terms of practices and thinking. The difference is that it's focused on how do you apply that in a leadership mode, not how do you apply that as a practitioner of an experience management discipline. And so, like, for instance, one of my big goals in life is to teach leaders about behavioral science,
Mm.
not not they don't have to become scientists, but I feel like if leaders better understood how people think, behave, and act, that they would make decisions. Just understanding that would make decisions that would improve humanity. And so that's what I'm working on now.
Let me ask you this. I work with C-suite executives on a daily basis, and the sense I'm still getting from them is this AI thing, we need it, we want it, let's put it into our systems. I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but it's just this whole we just gotta use all this AI thing. And the net impact of what I am seeing there is simply organizations rushing to do the easiest thing, to automate processes, to find efficiencies, to find that. I would love your take, especially one who's looking at it now from your point of view, on what are what are the mistakes you're seeing this early days around AI, and what are the things that gives you all kinds of optimism?
So I think AI is important enough that one of my missions on Humanity at Scale is to promote more human-centric technology, which right now is mostly on AI. So I think you're seeing a normal curve for a disruptive technology, right? In the short term, it gets overhyped, over deployed because people don't understand A, how difficult it is to really do the things they want to do, and B, they're just trying to do things that aren't truly aligned with their organizational goals and objectives. They're just trying to deploy it. And so what you'll see is, yeah, like every technology, people jump in, do a lot of things. A lot of stuff doesn't work. They'll get rid of it and they'll rethink it. So there'll be a cutback. And then, but over the long term, AI is going to dramatically change how work is done and how organizations operate for absolute sure. But a lot of stuff people are doing now. So what isn't going to be the stuff that holds? And one of the lessons I try to teach leaders is that you have to think about AI like you think about any other technology. It's a tool, not a strategy, right? Anyone who says that we're going to succeed because of AI is going to fail, right? Um, AI is just a tool. You're gonna succeed because you have a good strategy, you have a good focus on the market, you have a good discipline, you have a good operating model, and AI can be used as a tool to help you do that better for sure. And over time, it'll get easier and clearer on how to do that. But all too many people are deploying AI as if that's the strat. We need more AI. We need more AI. That is never the answer. And but I've been, I don't know, lucky or unlucky enough to have been involved in multiple technology waves. When I was at Forrester, I was projecting the internet economy and looking at how the internet was going to change everything from how online purchases were made to B2B interactive actions to actually how the internet was going to change the workforce as work moved to India and third world countries because the internet allowed the distance type of interactions, right? In all cases, people over deploy the technology in the short run because they don't have a clue what they're doing. But in the long run, it ends up being incredibly disruptive, which I think is clearly the path for AI.
One last question I'll ask you is, as I read your work, I really love how bold it is. I like to think I tend to write in that way as well, and try to be provocative. Share one uncomfortable truth you share with CEOs and C-suite leaders about this topic, that our audience should hear.
So, yeah, I try to break existing norms. To me, for the what I try to have leaders know is that they totally don't understand the people around them.
Mm,
Right, I talked about that earlier, right? Just trying to, and it's not just leaders, it's human beings. So, for instance, one of the articles I'm writing about now that I'm in the middle of, they'll come out in the next couple weeks, is about fundamental attribution error, right? And this is a story not just about leaders, but about human beings, but leaders too, which is when if you think about it, if you're driving your car and someone sort of goes through a stop sign faster than they should and you're driving with them, you think, okay, that's a jerk, right? um you know nothing about this situation. They could be pregnant on their way to the hospital. They could have just been fired from their job, and they're just not thinking, and they're really oftentimes careful. But if you do that same thing and you go through a stop sign, you give yourself all of the benefit of the doubt of the reason you did it. Oh, I
absolutely.
wasn't thinking, right? That's
Right.
fundamental attribution error. You assume that that person has the attributes associated with the behavior that they made. Um, and it's part of a broader sense of attribution error, which is when we see things happen, we assume that they are happening as is, and we create all of these. We distort our belief about the things around them and why they that there's no context to them. So, for instance, I see a customer who's unhappy, a leader who's unhappy. A leader goes out and sees a customers who are happy. Oh, that has to be wrong, right? The relationship manager has to be wrong. That's fundamental attribution error, right? We're attributing that problem to the people around it as opposed to the context and the situation in which it exists. So I try to get leaders. That's an example of, you have to think about the context, right? You can't just jump on, an unhappy customer may be a problem, but it may in fact not be a problem that needs to be solved.
Love that. I love that. What is it called? What attribution? What's the preceding word?
Fundamental attribution error.
Attribution error. Bruce, I always get smarter when I consume your content. This has been awesome. You coming on the show. Where can people find you? I know you're prolific on LinkedIn. Where else can they find you?
Yeah, I think the best place is just humanityatscale.com. That'll bring you to my Substack newsletter. So humanityatscale.com seems easy enough.
Awesome. Bruce, it's been a pleasure having you on, and we hope you'll come back and see us again.
Absolutely. I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. You've been listening to an Amos Talks production.